The moment that changed everything happened on a cold Saturday morning in early November, at exactly 9:43, while I was standing in my own kitchen, holding a chipped ceramic mug I had owned for over 20 years. "You don't really belong at the Christmas dinner this year," my daughter-in-law said over the phone. Her voice was smooth, practiced. "But if you insist on coming, you can help set up and clean afterward. We're keeping it intimate." I didn't answer right away. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee, watched it curl and disappear, and felt something inside my chest finally crack after years of careful pressure. My name is Lorraine Whitaker. I am 61 years old. I am a widow, a retired compliance manager, and for the last 7 years, I have been treated like a tolerated inconvenience by my own family. "What do you mean I don't belong?" I asked quietly. On the other end of the line, Ava laughed softly. Not cruelly, worse, casually, as if she were explaining seating arrangements to a caterer. "Well, you know," she said, "this year is really about our generation. My parents are coming, friends, people who are relevant. It's not personal." Not personal. That phrase has teeth. In the background, I could hear my son Daniel moving around, the clink of dishes, the muffled sound of a television. He was there, he was listening, and he was saying nothing. I waited for him to take the phone. He didn't. "So should I plan to come early?" I asked, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "Or would you prefer I just stay out of the way?" There was a pause. Then Ava said, "If you could arrive around noon, that would be helpful. Dinner is at 5. We'll have the food handled, obviously." Obviously. When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone to vent. I sat down at the small kitchen table in my rented condo outside Columbus, Ohio, and let the silence wrap around me like a verdict. I had raised Daniel on my own after his father died in a workplace accident when Daniel was 9. I worked full-time in corporate compliance, long hours, endless audits, ethical gray zones that required precision and backbone. I built a quiet reputation for being unmovable, principled, reliable. At home, I was soft. I packed lunches. I listened. I stayed invisible when he married Ava, a woman 12 years younger than him. Polished, ambitious, allergic to anything that smelled like limitation. The exclusion hadn't started all at once. It never does. It began with smaller holidays, with comments about my clothes, with suggestions that I relax while others handled things, with my name slowly disappearing from conversations about plans that affected me. I told myself it was temporary, that it was the price of peace. That Saturday morning, I finally admitted the truth. Peace was never the goal. Compliance was. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the gray parking lot below. A woman in a red coat loaded groceries into her trunk. A life moving forward. Mine felt paused. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "She didn't mean it like that. You know how she is." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I know exactly how she is. And for the first time, I let myself wonder a dangerous question. What if I stopped trying to belong? That afternoon, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a slim black folder labeled Estate Planning Documents. I had updated my will after my husband died, then forgotten about it. Or pretended to. I didn't open it yet. I didn't know then that Christmas would never happen the way Ava planned. I didn't know that the house I was about to inherit, the secrets tied to my old career, and the betrayal waiting just beneath the surface of my son's marriage would collide in ways none of them could control. But as I closed the drawer, one thing was already clear. They thought I was powerless. They were wrong. The first sign that I had underestimated how far they would go came 3 days later, on Tuesday, just after sunset. I was reheating soup when my phone rang. Daniel again. "Mom," he said, his voice tense. "We need to talk." I turned the stove off and sat down. My knees felt weak, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't about dinner anymore. "What's going on?" I asked. "Ava is worried," he said. "She thinks you took what she said the wrong way." I almost laughed. "And," he continued, "she mentioned that you've seemed withdrawn lately, not yourself." There it was, the beginning of the narrative shift. "I am myself," I said. "That might be the problem," he sighed. "She's just concerned about you being alone so much, about your finances, about whether you're managing everything okay. I closed my eyes. For years, I had helped companies avoid regulatory collapse. I had sat across from attorneys, auditors, executives who underestimated me because of my age or gender. And I had dismantled their arguments, piece by piece. And now my own son was questioning my capacity because his wife was uncomfortable with my silence? Are you saying you think I'm not competent? I asked calmly. No, he said quickly. Of course not. But Ava thinks maybe it would be good to loop in a professional, just to be safe. A professional. I felt the floor shift under me. Daniel, I said slowly, did you agree with her? He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I just don't want there to be problems, he said. There are already problems, I replied. You just don't want to see where they come from. The call ended awkwardly. No resolution, no reassurance. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the hum of the refrigerator, replaying every compromise I had made over the last decade. Every time I had smiled instead of spoken. Every holiday I had shown up early and left late, hoping effort would translate into belonging. It never had. At 3 a.m, I got up and opened the black folder. Inside was my will, a trust addendum, and a letter I had written to myself years earlier, after a particularly brutal corporate investigation where I had been pressured to falsify findings. Do not forget who you are when they decide you are inconvenient. I swallowed hard. The next morning, I called a name I hadn't spoken aloud in nearly 15 years. Rebecca Sloan. She had been my attorney during my final years in compliance. Sharp, ethical, unafraid of conflict. She answered on the second ring. Lorraine Whitaker, she said. I was wondering when you'd call. Within an hour, she knew everything. By noon, she had confirmed something I hadn't fully processed until she said it out loud. Lorraine, she said, if they formally question your competence, it triggers clauses you put in place years ago. Financial disclosures, asset reviews, and protections you built specifically to prevent family manipulation. I leaned back in my chair. I forgot how careful I was, I said. You weren't careful, Rebecca replied. You were prepared. That afternoon, Ava posted a photo on social media. A beautifully set table, neutral tones, candles. The caption read, planning a peaceful Christmas with the people who matter most. I stared at the screen, feeling something settle inside me. This was no longer about being excluded from dinner. This was about power, control, and the quiet assumption that I would never push back. I closed the app, picked up the phone, and made a second call. This time, to a man whose name Ava and Daniel had no idea existed. The executor of an estate tied to a chapter of my life they knew nothing about. When he answered, I said only one thing, it's time. On the other end of the line, he paused, then said, I was hoping you'd say that. And just like that, the balance began to shift. They still thought Christmas was coming. What they didn't know was that a reckoning was already on the calendar. The letter arrived on Thursday, folded neatly inside a cream-colored envelope with no return address. I almost threw it away. It sat there on my kitchen counter while I made toast, the paper heavy enough to catch my eye again and again. Something about it felt deliberate, patient, like it had been waiting for the right moment to surface. When I finally opened it, my hands were steady. My heart was not. Lorraine Whitaker. If you are reading this, it means the timing is finally correct. I sat down hard. The letter was signed by Martin Keller, a name that dragged me backward through time so abruptly I tasted metal in my mouth. Martin had been senior counsel for a manufacturing conglomerate I once helped dismantle from the inside, years before my retirement. A man who understood discretion the way surgeons understand anatomy. The estate you assisted in restructuring after the Caldwell investigation has been settled. The final beneficiary determination requires your confirmation. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. The Caldwell investigation. I closed my eyes. 22 years earlier, I had uncovered a pattern of internal fraud so sophisticated it had taken down an entire executive board. The whistleblower protection agreement had been ironclad, but I had walked away afterward, exhausted, widowed, determined to live smaller. I had never known the final outcome. Apparently, it had never finished with me either. I called Martin immediately. It's real, he said, before I could even ask. And Lorraine, it's significant. The board set aside a discretionary beneficiary trust for you after the settlement. It was contingent on one thing. What? I asked. That you not be under anyone's legal control. The room felt suddenly very still. So if my son tries to declare me incompetent, I said slowly, the trust activates. Yes, Martin replied. Fully and irrevocably. I thanked him and ended the call without another word. That night, Daniel showed up at my door, unannounced. He looked tired, older than his 42 years. Ava was not with him. She thinks you're angry, he said as soon as I let him in. She says you're punishing us by pulling away. I gestured for him to sit. I'm not angry, I said. I'm paying attention. He ran a hand through his hair. Mom, she's worried you're spiraling. She mentioned something about memory issues. There it was again, the quiet erosion of credibility. I balanced corporate ledgers worth billions, I said evenly. I raised you alone. I survived grief that nearly broke me. And now your wife is suggesting I can't manage my own life because I didn't respond the way she wanted? She just wants to help, he said weakly. No, I replied. She wants to manage. He looked away. I need to ask you something, I continued. And I need you to answer honestly. Did Ava suggest speaking to a lawyer about me? Daniel hesitated. That hesitation was the sound of a door closing. Yes, he admitted. She said it would be irresponsible not to. I nodded. Then listen to me carefully. If you move forward with that, there will be consequences you cannot undo. Is that a threat? He asked, startled. No, I said. It's a boundary. He stood up, agitated. Why are you acting like this is a battle? Because it is, I replied quietly. You just didn't realize you were standing on the other side. He left without hugging me. As the door closed, my phone buzzed. A message from Ava. We're only doing this because we love you. Please cooperate. I stared at the screen, then set the phone down face up on the table. Love, I had learned, does not require compliance. That night, I opened my calendar and circled Christmas in red, not as a holiday, as a deadline. The first legal email arrived the following Monday, precisely at 8:15 in the morning. Subject line, Preliminary Capacity Assessment Inquiry. It wasn't formal. Not yet. That was the point. It was an opening move designed to frighten me into compliance before they had to commit to anything that left a paper trail. Rebecca Sloan called me within minutes. They're fishing, she said, seeing if you'll panic. I won't, I replied. Good, she said, because if they escalate, they lose control of the narrative. By noon, Ava had posted another photo. This one featured her parents at a vineyard, glasses raised, sunlight perfect. The caption read, "Family is everything." I felt no jealousy, only clarity. That afternoon, I drove to the storage unit I'd rented years earlier when I downsized. Inside were boxes labeled with the careful handwriting of a woman who had always expected to need proof someday. Emails, audit logs, personal journals, documentation from cases I had worked on that never made headlines, including Caldwell. I took one box home and opened it at my kitchen table. Inside was a sealed envelope marked Beneficiary Addendum. My name was typed beneath it. The trust was worth more than I had made in my entire working life. More importantly, it contained a clause so specific it made my breath catch. Any attempt by immediate family members to assume legal authority over the beneficiary shall be interpreted as hostile action and permanently sever their access to information or assets associated with this trust. They had never known who they were dealing with. That evening, Daniel called again. Mom, he said, his voice strained. Ava scheduled a consultation, just a consultation. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I closed my eyes. I want you to hear me, I said. If you go forward with this, you will trigger protections that cannot be reversed. Not by apologies, not by intentions. Silence. You're choosing money over us, he said finally. No, I replied. I'm choosing myself over manipulation. He hung up. The next morning, a courier delivered official paperwork. Petition for evaluation of capacity. Filed by my son. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I called Rebecca and said only one thing. They crossed the line. She exhaled slowly. Then it's time. Within hours, the counterfilings were submitted. The trust activated. Notifications were sent. Financial disclosures demanded. By nightfall, Ava's consulting firm accounts were frozen pending review. Their names flagged for conflict of interest. My phone lit up nonstop. I turned it off. For the first time in years, I slept deeply because the injustice was no longer theoretical. It was documented. And the next move would not be theirs. Christmas was still weeks away, but the consequences had already begun. The first hearing was scheduled for the second week of December, 3 days after the town lit its Christmas tree. I watched the lights go up from my car, parked across the street. Families laughing, as if the world were simple. I remembered when I had believed that too. Before I learned how easily love could be leveraged into silence. Rebecca met me at her office the next morning. She had already assembled a timeline on the whiteboard. Names and arrows connecting actions to consequences. They underestimated you, she said, tapping the marker against the board. That's their first mistake. Their second was assuming you'd fold quietly. What happens now? I asked. Now, she said, we let the process expose them. The evaluator arrived that afternoon. Dr. Henry Latham, late 50s, measured voice, eyes that missed nothing. He asked about my routines, my finances, my memories. He asked me to count backward, to recall dates, to explain my reasoning for distancing myself from my family. I didn't distance myself, I said. They redefined my worth. I declined the role. He paused, pen hovering. Tell me more about that. For years, my presence was conditional, I said. Helpful, agreeable, invisible. When I stopped performing, concern replaced affection. He nodded slowly. At the end of the session, he closed his notebook. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, in my experience, confusion looks very different from clarity. You are exceptionally clear. After he left, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Ava says you embarrassed us. People are asking questions. I typed, then deleted, then typed again. Truth has that effect. That evening, Rebecca called. They're scrambling, she said. Ava's firm flagged multiple irregularities once the disclosures kicked in. She's blaming you. Of course she is, I replied. And Daniel, Rebecca continued. He's starting to realize what he signed. I sat quietly, staring at the calendar. The next morning, Ava showed up at my door. She looked different without her usual polish. Hair pulled back too tightly, jaw clenched. We need to talk, she said. No, I replied calmly. We needed to talk months ago. Now we need lawyers. She scoffed. You think this makes you powerful. I think it makes me protected, I said. You're destroying your son, she hissed. No, I replied. I'm letting him see. Her eyes flashed. You always hated me. I barely knew you, I said. You made sure of that. She left without another word. That night, Daniel called. His voice cracked halfway through my name. She moved money, he said, from our joint account. Before everything froze, I closed my eyes. I didn't know, he whispered. I believe you, I said. But belief doesn't undo damage. The hearing loomed closer, and for the first time, I felt something shift. Not fear, momentum. The courtroom smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old paper. Judge Marianne Caldwell sat high above us, her expression unreadable. Ava sat stiffly beside her attorney. Daniel was a few seats back, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. I sat alone. Rebecca stood when called, her voice steady as she outlined the facts. The petition, the evaluator's findings, the trust activation. Ava's attorney tried to frame it as concern, familial duty, protection. Judge Caldwell raised a hand. Concern does not begin with exclusion, she said coolly, and it does not escalate into financial control. She turned to Daniel. Mr. Whitaker, she said, did you understand the implications of this petition? He swallowed. No, Your Honor. Did anyone explain them to you? She pressed. He hesitated, then shook his head. Ava stiffened. Judge Caldwell leaned forward. Mrs. Whitaker, she said to me, do you feel unsafe or incapable of managing your affairs? No, I replied. I feel betrayed. The room went still. The judge nodded once. The petition is dismissed. Permanently. Ava stood abruptly. This is absurd. Sit down, the judge said sharply. This court is not finished. She ordered a full review of Ava's firm and issued a protective order restricting contact with me. Daniel looked up then, eyes wide. Outside the courthouse, snow began to fall. Daniel approached me slowly. I didn't see it, he said, until it was too late. You didn't want to, I replied gently. Tears slid down his face. I'm sorry, he whispered. I believed him. But belief, I had learned, was not the same as repair. As I walked away, my phone buzzed. A message from Martin Keller. Trust fully activated. Assets transferred. Congratulations. I looked up at the gray sky, snow settling quietly on my coat. They had tried to make me smaller. Instead, they had handed me proof. And this was only the beginning. The silence after the hearing felt heavier than the shouting ever had. For 3 days, no one called. No texts, no emails. Even Ava's social media went quiet, as if the world had collectively paused to see what would happen next. I used that quiet to do something I had not done in years. I rested. Not collapsed, not hid. Rested. Each morning, I walked the narrow path behind my condo, where frost clung to the grass like lace. My breath made small clouds in the air. I listened to my own footsteps, steady and unhurried, and noticed how different my body felt when it wasn't braced for the next demand. On the 4th day, Daniel showed up again. He looked thinner. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion. He stood in my doorway like a man unsure whether he was allowed inside his own past. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't asked for but accepted. We didn't speak for a while. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, a neighbor's television murmured. She emptied another account, he said finally, before the freeze expanded. I closed my eyes slowly. How much? I asked. Enough, he said. Enough that the bank flagged it before I even noticed. That was the part that hurt him most. Not the money. The realization that he had stopped paying attention to his own life. She says it's because of you, he added, that you forced her hand. I looked at him. Really looked. She didn't need me to do what she was already doing, I said. She just needed a reason. He nodded, staring into his coffee. There's something else, he said. I waited. She's been using my name, he continued. On contracts, letters, to reassure clients. I didn't authorize it. My chest tightened. That's not a marriage problem, I said. That's a legal one. He flinched. She's saying if I don't back her publicly, she'll make this ugly. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. Daniel, I said quietly, it's already ugly. You just stop pretending it wasn't. He swallowed hard. I don't know who she is anymore, he whispered. I said the truth I had learned too late myself. You do. You just didn't want to believe her. That night, Rebecca called. There's a complication, she said. My shoulders tensed. What kind? Workplace, she replied. Your old employer. They've resurfaced. I sat down. They claim the Caldwell investigation documentation you retained contains proprietary material, she continued. They're suggesting misuse. That's absurd, I said. I kept copies under whistleblower protection. I know, Rebecca said, but someone prompted them to look. I knew who. Ava didn't just want control. She wanted retaliation. Rebecca lowered her voice. If this escalates, it drags your professional history into public view. Then let it, I said. There was a pause. Lorraine, she said carefully, some of what you uncovered back then was buried very deep, deeper than you were ever told. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. What are you saying? I asked. I'm saying, she replied, this might get bigger than family. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, listening to the building settle. For the first time since this began, I felt uncertainty creep in, not fear, anticipation. Because Ava didn't know what she had just awakened. And neither, I realized, did I. The subpoena arrived 2 days before Christmas. Not for me. For Ava. Daniel called the moment he saw it. They're charging her, he said, voice shaking. Federal, fraud, identity misuse. They linked it back to contracts she signed in my name. I leaned against the counter, steadying myself. And the company, he continued, they're cooperating. Fully. Of course they were. Once regulators start circling, loyalty evaporates. She thinks you orchestrated this, he added bitterly. I didn't, I said. I just stopped protecting her from consequences. He was silent. She wants to talk to you, he said finally. She says this all goes away if you help her. I laughed. A short, incredulous sound. How? I asked. She wants you to issue a statement, he said, saying you've been confused, that the trust is temporary, that you overreacted. I closed my eyes. She still thinks this is about appearances, I said. She's terrified, Daniel replied. So was I said softly. For years. That evening, Ava emailed me directly. Subject: We need to fix this. The message was long, carefully worded, apologetic in tone, but not in substance. She framed herself as misunderstood, overwhelmed, pressured by expectations. She never once said the words, I'm sorry. At the end, she wrote, You always said family comes first. I typed a reply and deleted it 3 times before settling on one sentence. Family does not require self-erasure. I sent it. An hour later, Rebecca called. They've expanded the inquiry, she said. Your former employer's attempt to discredit you backfired. They reopened the Caldwell records. My heart pounded. They're asking questions, she continued, about why certain findings were buried, about who benefited. I sat down hard. Lorraine, she said, your integrity back then is about to matter again. I thought of the nights I'd spent alone, documenting, double-checking, refusing to bend. The cost of it, the isolation. I'm ready, I said. On Christmas Eve, snow fell thick and silent. Daniel came by once more. He didn't bring gifts, just truth. She's blaming you publicly now, he said, saying you manipulated me, that you're vindictive. I smiled sadly. Let her, I said. She's telling people who she is. He looked at me for a long moment. I chose wrong, he said. Yes, I replied, but you're choosing again. When he left, I sat by the window and watched the snow cover the ground, erasing footprints, resetting the landscape. Ava thought Christmas was leverage. She didn't realize it was a deadline, because after the holiday, the truth wouldn't just come out. It would testify. The morning after Christmas felt unnaturally quiet, as if the world were holding its breath. I woke before dawn, the sky still dark, my body alert in a way it hadn't been in years. Not anxious, prepared. I made coffee and sat at the table with my hands wrapped around the mug, listening to the building wake up, one sound at a time. At 7:12, Rebecca called. They've scheduled depositions, she said. Yours, Ava's, and 2 former executives from Caldwell. I closed my eyes slowly. So it's official, I said. They're reopening everything. Yes, she replied. And Lorraine, they are not looking at you as a footnote. They're looking at you as a linchpin. That word settled into my chest with unexpected weight. For more than 2 decades, I had believed my role ended when I walked away. That the truth I documented had been absorbed, diluted, buried beneath settlements and non-disclosure agreements. It hadn't been buried. It had been waiting. Daniel arrived later that morning, unannounced but expected. He looked different again, straighter somehow, like someone who had finally stopped negotiating with himself. She's been arrested, he said quietly. Not jailed yet, but processed. I nodded. She's telling anyone who will listen that you set her up, he continued, that you've been planning this since the beginning. I met his eyes. Do you believe her? He shook his head immediately. No, and that's the worst part. I defended her for years. I silenced myself for her. That's how manipulation works, I said. It doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in. He sat down heavily. I looked back at emails, he said, at the way she talked about you, about your money, about your will. My jaw tightened. She was counting on it, he added, on you passing quietly, on me inheriting something she could control. I exhaled slowly. That's why she panicked, I said. Not because I pulled away. Because I lived. He nodded, tears bright in his eyes. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. You don't fix it, I replied. You face it. That afternoon, I reviewed the deposition notice. My name, typed neatly beneath the heading, Witness. For years, I had avoided that word. It felt dangerous, exposing. Now, it felt earned. Rebecca came over with a stack of folders. We need to prepare, she said. Not just legally, emotionally. We worked for hours. Timeline, documents, correspondence, Every decision I had made during the Caldwell investigation, every red flag I had escalated, every retaliation I had quietly absorbed. At one point, Rebecca stopped and looked at me. "Do you know why they're reopening this now?" she asked. "Because Ava tried to weaponize my past," I said. "Yes," she agreed. "But also because regulators are finally willing to listen." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying voices from years ago. Executives telling me to soften language. Colleagues warning me not to be difficult. I had been difficult, and it had cost me promotions, friendships, peace. But it had saved something more important, my integrity. As sleep finally came, one thought anchored me. Ava thought exposure would destroy me. She never understood that exposure was where I had always been strongest. The deposition room was smaller than I expected. No drama, no raised voices. Just fluorescent lights and a long table scarred by years of truth extraction. Ava sat across from me. She looked nothing like the woman who once hosted curated dinners and posed effortlessly for photographs. Her posture was rigid. Her eyes darted constantly. The confidence that once filled every room she entered had collapsed inward. When she saw me, her mouth tightened. I nodded politely. The attorney began with routine questions. Name, age, occupation. "Retired compliance manager," I said. "Former senior ethics officer." Ava shifted. As the questions deepened, I felt something unexpected. Calm. They asked about Caldwell, about the investigation, about my documentation practices. I answered precisely, without embellishment, without apology. When Ava's attorney tried to suggest personal animosity had influenced my findings, I met his gaze evenly. "My findings were based on evidence," I said, "not feelings." That distinction mattered then. It matters now. He pressed harder. "Isn't it true," he said, "that you retained materials beyond your employment?" "Yes," I replied, "under whistleblower protection, as advised by counsel." "Why?" he asked. "Because I was instructed to alter reports," I said. "And I refused." The room went still. Ava's attorney glanced at her. She stared at the table. When it was her turn, the shift was immediate. She spoke quickly, too quickly, framed everything as misunderstanding, claimed Daniel's name had been used with implicit consent, claimed her firm's finances were complex, not fraudulent. Then she turned to me. "You've always resented me," she said. "You couldn't stand that Daniel chose me." I met her eyes. "This has nothing to do with you being chosen," I said. "It has everything to do with you assuming ownership." She laughed sharply. "You're rewriting history." "No," I replied. "I'm finally telling it." The deposition ended after 6 hours. Outside, Daniel waited. He looked up when he saw me. "How did it go?" he asked. I considered the question. "It went exactly how it needed to," I said. Rebecca joined us moments later, her expression composed, but satisfied. "They have enough," she said, "for charges, for settlements, for consequences." Daniel exhaled shakily. "I never thought it would end like this," he said. "It didn't end," I replied. "It revealed." That evening, as I drove home, the city lights blurred past my windshield. I felt something loosen inside me. Not triumph, release. For years, I had carried the weight of knowing without being heard, of seeing without being believed. Now, the truth had witnesses, and Ava, who built her power on control and silence, was finally standing in the one place she never learned to survive, under the light. The fallout was not immediate. It never is. Truth doesn't explode. It spreads. In the weeks following the deposition, the world around me shifted in quiet, irrevocable ways. Ava's firm dissolved under investigation. Clients vanished. Partners issued statements distancing themselves. The woman who once curated her life like a brand became a liability no one wanted to be associated with. Daniel moved into a short-term apartment across town. "I needed space to think," he told me one evening as we sat in my living room, the first time he'd been there without tension humming between us. "Not from you. From the version of myself I became." I nodded. He had stopped defending her publicly, then privately, then at all. "She still says you ruined her," he added, staring at the floor. "That if you just stayed quiet, none of this would have happened." "That's often how people explain consequences," I said. "As betrayal." He looked up. Do you ever wish you had just endured it? I didn't answer right away. I thought of the nights I had lain awake questioning my worth, of the holidays where my chair felt temporary, of the way my voice had softened over the years, not from age, but from habit. No, I said finally. I wish I had stopped enduring sooner. He swallowed hard. The regulators contacted me again in mid-January. They thanked me, formally, then asked if I would be willing to consult on updated compliance frameworks. You don't have to, Rebecca reminded me later. You've earned rest. I don't want to disappear again, I said. Not from myself. I accepted. It felt strange to step back into rooms where my words carried weight, to watch people take notes when I spoke, to feel my spine straighten, not from defiance, but recognition. One afternoon, as I walked out of a federal building into pale winter sunlight, my phone buzzed. A message from Ava. Just one sentence. You won. Are you happy now? I stared at it for a long time before typing my reply. This was never about winning. It was about surviving with dignity. She never responded. Daniel finalized the separation shortly after. Not out of spite, out of clarity. I don't hate her, he said quietly. But I don't recognize myself with her, and I don't want to become that man again. That night, after he left, I sat alone and allowed myself to grieve. Not for the marriage that ended, for the years it had taken to believe I deserved more than tolerance. Grief and relief often arrive together, twins you don't expect, but learn to recognize. By February, the trust assets had fully settled. Not just money, but freedom. The ability to choose without fear of retaliation or dependence. I downsized again, this time by choice. A smaller place, brighter, near a park where women my age walked in the mornings, unafraid to take up space. Sometimes they smiled at me. Sometimes we talked. I was no longer invisible, and I no longer needed revenge to feel whole. The justice had come quietly, thoroughly, and it had cleared the ground for something better. On the first warm day of March, I hosted dinner. Nothing elaborate, no themes, no curated table settings. Just good food, honest conversation, and enough chairs for everyone to sit comfortably without earning their place. Daniel arrived early. He helped chop vegetables. We moved easily around each other, the way we had when he was a boy, before silence became strategy. You seem lighter, he said as we cooked. I am, I replied. I stopped carrying what wasn't mine. After dinner, as dusk settled outside the windows, he lingered. I don't expect forgiveness, he said carefully. Not for everything. I know, I said, but I hope, he continued, that we can build something new, something honest. I met his eyes. We already are, I said, because honesty starts with seeing. Later, alone, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window. The city hummed softly, lives unfolding, choices being made. I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of this story. The one who stood in her kitchen holding a chipped mug, believing exclusion was something she had to accept to remain lovable. She had been wrong. Love does not require disappearance. Respect does not demand silence. And revenge, I had learned, is not always loud or cruel. Sometimes it is simply refusing to be erased. If you're listening to this story and you've ever been told to stay quiet, stay grateful, stay small to keep the peace, I want you to hear this clearly. The peace that costs you your voice is not peace. It is surrender. And you are allowed at any age to stand up, to reclaim your truth, and to let the consequences fall where they may. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and the power of finally choosing yourself. And tell me, honestly, what would you have done in my place?